Chapter 1. Sofia. The lace was a liar. It pretended to be delicate, a fragile webbing of ivory thread and seed pearls that whispered of purity and tradition. But to me it was a cage. It was a shroud. It was the most expensive, suffocating instrument of torture my father had ever purchased. And he had purchased many. Breathe, Sofia. The command was useless. The air in the bridal chamber of St. Patrick's was thick with the cloying, funereal scent of lilies. Thousands of them, white and waxy, their yellow pollen dusting every surface like sulfur. They were his favorites. Signor Antonio Bianchi, a man 3 times my age, with a damp, grasping handshake and eyes that had already catalogued, dissected, and owned every piece of me. My father, Don Valerio Costanzo, had called it a merger, an alliance. I called it a human sacrifice. The heavy satin of the wedding dress weighed at least 30 pounds. The train, a monstrous river of silk, was pooled at my feet. My ribs ached from the corset, a brutal device of whalebone and laces that my mother had yanked tight with a grim, thin-lipped satisfaction. Beauty requires sacrifice, Cara, she'd murmured. She meant survival requires sacrifice, and I was the lamb. I stared at my reflection in the full-length, gilt-edged mirror. The girl looking back was a stranger. Her skin was too pale, her dark eyes wide and hollow, her black hair tortured into an intricate, pearl-studded knot at the base of her neck. The veil, when it was dropped, would be a mercy. It would hide the terror. A sharp rap on the heavy oak door made me jump, the pearls in my hair rattling. 5 minutes, Sofia, my father's voice boomed. Not a request, a sentence. 5 minutes until I was shackled to a monster. 5 minutes until my life, the small, flickering flame of it, was snuffed out. Panic, cold and acidic, surged up my throat. I'd been numb for weeks, a ghost floating through dress fittings and tasting cakes that turned to ash in my mouth. But here now, the reality of it was a physical blow. I thought of Bianchi's wet, cigar-scented breath on my cheek at the rehearsal dinner, the way his thumb had brushed the inside of my wrist, a casual claim that had made my skin crawl. Number. No, I can't. I won't. The thought was a spark. It was insane. It was impossible. Running from my father was a death sentence. Marrying Bianchi was just a slower, more humiliating one. But the spark caught. My heart, which had been a dull, heavy stone in my chest, suddenly slammed against my ribs. 1, 2, 3. It was a frantic, wild drumbeat. Run where, you fool? The church was swarming. 2 of my father's men were outside this door. Another 2 were at the front, disguised as ushers. Bianchi's men were everywhere else. This wasn't a wedding, it was a prisoner exchange. Think. I looked around the room. It was opulent, gold and marble, with a single tall window that looked out over the side alley. It was at least a 20-foot drop. The door, the window, a third option. I remembered the tour. The priest had shown my mother the historical parts of the church. The narrow, winding servants' passages behind the apse, used by altar boys. One of them led to a small, unassuming door near the kitchens, which led out onto the other side of the church. The side where the catering vans and dash. The guest limousines. It was a stupid plan. A desperate, suicidal, childish plan. It wouldn't work. My father knocked again. Harder. Sofia! Now. The adrenaline was so sharp it tasted like copper. I didn't make a conscious decision. My body just moved. I grabbed the hem of the monstrous dress, yanking the 30-pound train up and bundling it in my arms. The sheer volume of fabric was staggering. I moved to the heavy tapestry hanging behind the vanity, the one the priest had shown us. My fingers, trembling so hard I could barely aim them, fumbled for the edge. I tore it back. A small dark latch. I twisted it. The panel of wall clicked open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passage. Dust and cold, stale air hit my face. Don't think. Just go. I plunged into the darkness, pulling the secret panel shut behind me. The click was deafeningly final. It was impossibly tight. The dress was my enemy. The hoops in the skirt snagged on the rough stone, the pearls on my bodice scraped against the wall. I was crying. Hot, silent tears of pure terror. But I couldn't stop. I hiked the skirt higher, my legs bare, the garter, something blue, a final insult, biting into my thigh. I half ran, half fell down the narrow, spiraling stairs, the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing in the small space. I could hear the muffled thunder of the organ starting up. The wedding march. My wedding march. They were waiting. They would realize I was gone. I burst out of the passage into a small, dark sacristy. An altar boy no older than 12 gaped at me, his mouth a perfect O. "He's sick," I gasped, shoving past him. My groom, he's sick. I need to get to his car." It was a terrible lie, but the boy was too stunned to question the frantic, wild-eyed bride barreling through his sanctuary. I slammed through the side door and into the bright, sudden chaos of the street. It was exactly as I'd hoped. This side alley was for drop-offs. A line of sleek black cars, Lincolns, Cadillacs, a few Escalades, idled by the curb. Guests were still arriving, walking up the main path, their backs to me. No one was looking. Yet. I heard a shout from the church doors I'd just fled. A man's voice. My father's. "Sofia!" That one word shattered the last of my reason. I ran. I sprinted for the last car in the line. It was the furthest away, the most protected. It wasn't a Lincoln. It was a tank. A black, armored Rolls-Royce Phantom, its windows tinted to absolute black, so polished they looked like liquid obsidian. It was absurdly opulent, even for this crowd. It screamed power. It screamed untouchable. I didn't aim for the driver's side. I aimed for the back passenger door. My hand, pale and shaking against the black steel, grabbed the handle. I pulled. It was unlocked. For a single blinding second, I froze. It was a miracle, a sign. "Stop her! Grab her!" My father's men were rounding the corner. Big men in tight suits. I didn't hesitate. I yanked the door open, threw my entire body, dress, train, veil, and all inside, and landed in a heap of satin and pearls on the plush, carpeted floor. I fumbled for the door, my hand slipping on the smooth inner handle, and slammed it shut just as a fist pounded on the glass outside. The world went silent. The car was soundproof, utterly, completely, terrifyingly silent. The pounding outside was a dull, distant thud, thud, thud. I lay on the floor, hyperventilating, my veil askew, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The car smelled incredible. Not of cigar smoke or old whiskey. It smelled of rich, clean leather, expensive cologne, and something metallic, something dangerous. "Help me," I sobbed to the floor, to the empty car. "Please, just drive. Please." Silence. I pushed myself up, my arms shaking. The car was empty. I was alone in the cavernous back seat, a space more like a small lounge, all black leather and polished chrome. The thudding on the window grew more frantic. They were screaming my name. And then, a sound from inside the car made my blood turn to ice. A soft, electronic whir. I looked forward. The partition, the solid black screen that separated the back seat from the driver, was sliding down. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the door, my dress a useless shield. The partition lowered, revealing not a driver, but a man. He was sitting in the forward-facing passenger seat, which was turned to face the back. He wasn't looking at the window, at the men trying to break in. He was looking at me. Even in the dim, ambient light of the car, he was the most arresting man I had ever seen. He was young, not old like Bianchi. My age, maybe late 20s, a sharp, custom-tailored suit that fit his broad shoulders to perfection. A face that wasn't handsome in a soft way, but in a way that was all hard angles and brutal perfection. Black hair, cut short, and eyes. Eyes so dark they looked black, lit with a cold, terrifying amusement. He didn't speak. He just watched me, this pathetic, hysterical mess of a bride, weeping on his floor. The pounding on the window was a frenzy. I finally found my voice, a pathetic whisper. "Please," I begged. "Please, he's going to, just drive. Please." The man looked at the window, then back at me. A slow, cruel smile touched the corner of his mouth. He was Dante Russo. The devil Russo, the dawn of the Russo family. My father's most hated, most feared mortal enemy. I hadn't escaped. I had just delivered myself to the king of the underworld. My sob caught in my throat, choking me. Dante Russo leaned forward, the scent of his cologne washing over me. He was so close I could see the faint stubble on his sharp jaw. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He murmured, his voice a low, smooth baritone that vibrated through my very bones. "Wrong groom." He brought a single finger up, not to me, but to the intercom. "Drive, Marco." The Rolls-Royce's engine, which had been silent, roared to life. The car surged forward with a force that threw me back against the seat, leaving my family, my groom, and my entire life screaming in the dust behind us.
Chapter 2. Dante. The sound of my own men's incompetence was giving me a headache. "He's moving the product through the harbor, Don Russo." "We've tried. You haven't tried anything," I'd said, cutting him off an hour ago. The meeting had been a waste of carbon. I'd ended it, as I always did, with a quiet set of orders that would likely result in 3 new job openings in my organization by morning. Now, I was sitting in my Phantom, parked half a block down from St. Patrick's, the partition up. I preferred the silence. It was the only place I was ever truly alone, encased in 4 inches of soundproof, bomb-proof steel and glass. I wasn't here for the meeting. I was here for the wedding. My presence was a message. I had no intention of going inside. I wasn't invited, for one. Don Valerio Costanzo, the weasel, would have a stroke at the mere sight of me. And Antonio Bianchi, the groom, was a relic who should have been buried 2 decades ago. No, I was here to watch, to let my shadow fall over their alliance. This merger was an act of desperation. Costanzo's organization was bleeding money, and he was selling his only daughter, Sofia, to plug the hole. Bianchi, a man whose tastes ran toward the funereal, was all too happy to acquire a new, pale, breathing porcelain doll. The entire affair was pathetic, and it was an inconvenience. A united Costanzo-Bianchi front was a problem I didn't have time for. My driver, Marco, was silent in the front seat, as he was paid to be. "They're starting," he said, his voice a dispassionate murmur over the intercom. I glanced at the church. The organ music was a dull, sanctimonious vibration I could feel through the soles of my shoes. Let them. We'll leave once the bride is inside. I want Costanzo to know I was here. Let him sweat. A flicker of movement at the side of the church caught my eye. A side door, not the main entrance. A man, one of Costanzo's, burst out, his face purple. He looked frantic, interesting. He bellowed something I couldn't hear. Then another joined him. "Problem," Marco stated. "So I see," I murmured, leaning forward. And then a flash of white. It was her, the bride. I felt a slow, cold smile pull at my lips. This was not on the program. She was running, hiking up a dress that looked like it weighed more than she did, sprinting down the alleyway with a panic that was primal. She was a bolting deer. "She's running," Marco said, a rare note of surprise in his voice. "She is," I agreed. Behind her, her father, Valerio himself, appeared, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "Sofia!" I could read his lips. The sound, of course, didn't penetrate my car. She was running right for the line of limousines. A foolish, desperate act. Every car there belonged to a guest or a made man. She was a mouse running into a den of snakes to escape a hawk. "She won't get far," I mused, sipping the last of my scotch from the crystal tumbler in my hand. She ran past the first Lincoln, past the Escalade. She was heading for the end of the line. She was heading for me. My hand paused, the tumbler halfway to the console. "Marco," I said, my voice dropping. "Don't move. Dawn, she's..." "Stay. In. The car." She was at the back passenger door, her pale, shaking hand. The one that should have been wearing Bianchi's ring grabbed the handle. She pulled, and the door opened. Marco swore, his hand flying to the Glock beneath his jacket. "Dawn, the door, I was about to..." Silence. I had been about to leave. Marco had unlocked the doors, ready to exit and get behind the wheel. We were seconds from pulling away. And in that 1-second window, fate had intervened. She fell inside. It wasn't a graceful entrance. It was a crash. A $30,000 avalanche of white satin, pearls, and panic landing in a heap on the floor of my car. The door slammed shut, and the world went silent. The thud, thud, thud of fists began on the window, but in here, it was nothing. A dull, rhythmic annoyance, like a distant heartbeat. I sat in the forward-facing seat, behind the partition, and simply watched. My first coherent thought was, "She's ruined the dress." My second was, "She smells of lilies and terror." It was an intoxicating combination. I'd seen pictures of Sofia Costanzo. Every Dawn in the city had. She was a name on a piece of paper, a bargaining chip, a political asset. The photos had shown a pale, dark-haired, boringly pretty girl staring blankly at the camera. The girl on my floor was not boring. She was hyperventilating, her veil twisted around her neck like a noose, her dark hair coming undone from its intricate prison. She was a beautiful, terrified, wild animal, and she was trapped. "Help me," she sobbed to the floor. "Please, just drive. Please." She was begging an empty car. The partition was still up. She thought she was alone. The sheer, exquisite irony of it. The daughter of Valerio Costanzo, running from Antonio Bianchi, had just locked herself in a steel box with me. Dante, the devil, Russo. The man her father hated more than God. This was not an opportunity. This was a gift. A very, very complicated gift. The pounding outside grew more frantic. I could see Valerio's face, contorted in rage, his mouth forming curses. A few of Bianchi's goons were there too, looking utterly useless. They could have been banging on the side of a mountain for all the good it would do them. They can't have her. The thought was not strategic. It was instinctive, possessive. This creature had chosen my sanctuary. She had, by blind, stupid luck, delivered herself to me. To hand her back to her father, or to the desiccated corpse she was supposed to marry, was a physical impossibility. She was a bargaining chip, yes. The ultimate one. Costanzo's entire alliance depended on this marriage. Without it, he was ruined. Bianchi was humiliated, but as I looked at the frantic pulse beating in her pale throat, the thought of bargaining with her felt wrong. I pressed the button. The partition whirred and began to slide down. She heard it. Her head snapped up. Her dark eyes, not brown, but a deep, smoky gray I could see even in the dim light, widened. She scrambled back, a wounded thing, pressing herself against the door, the white dress her only armor. It was pathetic. And it was unbearably hot. I let the silence stretch. I let her look at me. I let her take in the suit, the face, the absolute calm. I let her compare it to the screaming, impotent rage on the other side of the glass. She didn't recognize me. Not yet. She was just a girl, terrified of the men outside, begging the new man who had appeared in front of her. "Please," she whispered. It was a broken sound. "Please, he's going to just drive. Please." I savored the please. I wondered what she would offer. I wondered how far she would go to escape. I glanced slowly at the window, at her father's face. Then I looked back at her. A slow smile touched my mouth, and I saw it. The recognition, the shift. Her blood drained from her face, leaving her a stark, beautiful white. Her terror of the men outside was nothing compared to this. This was the dawning, soul-deep horror of a person who realizes they haven't escaped the trap. They've just fallen into the real one. Her mouth opened, but only a choked sob came out. Oh yes. This was infinitely better than simply watching the wedding. I leaned forward, deliberately invading her space. I breathed her in. Lilies, fear, and underneath it all, a clean, feminine scent that was purely her. She flinched, her entire body going rigid. I was so close I could see the individual pearls sewn into her bodice, the frantic pulse at the base of her throat. I wanted to put my thumb there. I kept my voice low, a murmur just for her, a sound that wouldn't even carry to the front seat. Wrong groom. Her eyes squeezed shut, a single tear breaking free and tracing a path down her pale cheek. I watched it fall. Then, I turned, my mood suddenly decisive. I brought one finger to the intercom button. "Drive, Marco." The Phantom's V12 engine, which had been idling so quietly it was non-existent, thundered to life. The car didn't roll, it surged. The power was so immediate and brutal that it threw Sofia back against the seat, a small cry torn from her lips. We launched from the curb, the squeal of the tires a final "fuck you" to the men left standing in the street. I watched in the side mirror as Costanzo and his men became small, pathetic figures, screaming in a cloud of our exhaust. The car sped into Manhattan traffic, a black ghost disappearing in plain sight. The partition was still down. The car was silent again, save for the whisper of the tires on the asphalt. She was staring at me, her chest heaving, her hands fisted in the white satin of her dress. The terror was still there, but now it was frozen, brittle. She was a statue of panic. I didn't speak. I just watched her. I let the silence build. I let her suffocating, claustrophobic new reality settle in. She had run from her cage, straight into mine. and the lock had just clicked shut.
Chapter 3. Sofia. The surge of the Rolls-Royce was so powerful it was like being pushed by an invisible giant hand. My head snapped back, cracking against the plush leather headrest. A choked, pathetic sound, half sob, half scream, was torn from my throat. The world outside the tinted windows dissolved into a high-speed blur of gray and yellow. We were in traffic, but the car moved like a shark parting a school of fish. A fluid, unstoppable force. And inside there was only silence. A thick, suffocating, tomb-like silence. The soundproofing was absolute. The frantic, screaming world I had just fled, my father's purple-faced rage, the shouts of his men, the pounding on the glass, was gone. It had been erased, as if it had never existed. All that was left was him. Dante Russo. My mind couldn't seem to hold on to the name. It was too big, too mythic. He was a story parents told their children to make them behave. The devil Russo, a boogeyman in a bespoke suit. He was the man my father spoke of in hushed, venomous tones. A rival who was not just a criminal, but a different species of predator altogether. Younger, more ruthless, with none of the old-world honor my father pretended to uphold. And I was in his car. I was in his car, wearing a 30-pound wedding dress, my hair unraveling, my body rigid with a terror so profound it had burned past the hot, frantic adrenaline and settled into a glacial, paralyzing cold. He just watched me. He was still in the forward-facing seat, turned to observe me. He hadn't moved a muscle. His hands rested lightly on his knees. His breathing was slow and even, utterly unaffected. He wasn't excited. He wasn't angry. He was, at most, interested. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. My father raged. Bianchi leered. His men postured and threatened. They were all hot, messy, predictable emotions. This man was cold. He was a block of polished, perfect marble, and I was the insect he'd found skittering across it. I tried to breathe, but the air was too thick. It was his. It was saturated with the scent of him. An expensive, intoxicating cologne that was nothing like my father's cigars or Bianchi's damp, powdery smell. This was sharp, clean and masculine. Bergamot, maybe, and leather, and something else I couldn't name, something that smelled like clean steel. It was filling my lungs, invading my bloodstream. I felt like I was suffocating on it. I was still pressed against the door, my body angled away from him as much as the small space would allow. My hands were fisted in the ruined satin of my skirt, my nails biting into my palms. Ground yourself. Think. But there was nothing to think. I had made a catastrophic, fatal error. I had run from the wolves and thrown myself into the den of the lion. He's my father's enemy. What did that mean? Would he kill me? A message to my father? This is what happens when you try to merge with my rival. Would he use me? I thought of Bianchi, of his damp, grasping hands, and a fresh wave of nausea hit me. I looked at Dante Russo. His face was all hard angles. His mouth was a sharp, perfect line. He was, in a brutal, objective way, beautiful. The kind of beautiful that belonged on a fallen angel. The thought of his hands on me didn't evoke the same slimy disgust as Bianchi. It evoked a purer, sharper, more visceral terror. The silence stretched on. 1 minute, 2. The car slid through the city, an untouchable black ghost. Where were we going? Where was he taking me? The not knowing was a separate kind of torture. My mind raced, tumbling over itself, searching for an escape that didn't exist. I couldn't get out. The doors were locked, and even if they weren't, we were moving at 60 miles an hour. I couldn't fight him. He was twice my size, and I was trapped in a cage of whalebone and silk. The driver up front, the one he'd called Marco, was almost certainly armed. I was a prisoner. I had fled my wedding just to be captured by a different, more dangerous man. The irony was so bitter it was a physical taste in my mouth, like bile and lilies. The dress. God, the dress. It was hot, heavy, and utterly absurd. The pearls and lace that had been meant for a sacred isle were now a mockery in this dark, lethal car. I was a prop, a runaway bride, a pathetic, hysterical cliché. I had to say something. The silence was a weight, pressing down on my chest, and he was controlling it. He was letting it build, letting me unravel. I dragged my eyes from the polished wood inlay on the door and forced myself to meet his gaze. It was a mistake. His eyes were exactly as I'd seen them before. Dark, amused, and impossibly deep. They held mine, and I felt a jolt, as if I'd touched a live wire. There was no pity in them, no mercy, just a cold, possessive assessment. He was cataloging me, my fear, my unraveling hair, the pulse that I could feel hammering in my throat, visible under my skin. I wanted to put my hand over it, to hide the last flickering sign of life. I opened my mouth, but what came out was a dry, rasping croak. Where? I had to swallow, my throat clicking. Where are you taking me? Dante Russo didn't answer for a long moment. He just held my gaze. I had the sudden, disorienting feeling that he was seeing everything. Not just the terrified bride, but the girl I'd been. The daughter who had been a pawn her entire life. The sacrifice. When he finally spoke, his voice was just as I remembered it. A low, smooth baritone that slid under my skin and vibrated in my bones. Home. One word. It should have been comforting. From him, it was a death sentence. You can't, I whispered, the words tumbling out, weak and useless. My father. He'll start a war. The corner of his mouth twitched, a ghost of a smile. He already has. This merger was his latest move. Please, I tried again, though I knew it was useless. The word had no power here. I can pay you, I don't know how, but I can't. I can't go with you. You have to let me go, please. He leaned forward. The motion was sudden and fluid. In 1 second, he was across the small space. In the next, he was right in front of me, his knees almost touching the poof of my dress. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. His proximity was a physical blow. The heat from his body, the overwhelming scent of him, it all hit me at once. I was caged in, his shadow falling over me, his face just inches from mine. I pressed myself so hard against the door that the handle dug into my back. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in his presence. He reached out and I flinched, my eyes squeezing shut. I braced for a hand in my hair, a blow, a touch. Nothing. I opened my eyes. His hand had stopped, his fingers hovering in the air, just an inch from my face. He wasn't looking at my eyes. He was looking at the tear track on my cheek, the one I'd felt fall when I first recognized him. His gaze was intense, unblinking. Slowly, he lowered his hand. He leaned in, his voice a soft, lethal murmur, meant only for me. You just made an enemy of your family, he whispered. I stared at him, my heart a trapped bird. He was right. I had run. In our world, there was no forgiveness for that. I was disgraced. I was nothing. He watched the realization dawn on my face. Then he leaned in even closer. His breath, clean and warm, brushed my ear. And you just made yourself my problem? He pushed back then, settling into his seat as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just taken my entire world, shattered it, and claimed the pieces. Welcome to your new life, Sofia. The partition between us and the driver began to slide up, a black wall rising to entomb me in the back seat with him. alone. The last click of the mechanism locking it in place sounded just like a cell door.
Chapter 4. Dante. The drive from the church to my penthouse was a masterclass in tension. The partition was up. I had raised it to give myself a moment to think, to put a barrier between me and the problem in my back seat. But the partition did nothing. I could still smell her. Lilies and terror. That clean, underlying scent of her. It was in the recycled air of the car. It was a distraction I couldn't afford, and one I found myself infuriatingly craving. We didn't speak. I didn't need to. I could hear her on the other side, or rather, I could feel her. The sound of a single, hitched, desperate breath. The rustle of that monstrous, beautiful dress as she shifted, pressing herself against the door, as far away from me as she could get. She was terrified. Good. Fear was a language I understood. It was a currency. But as I sat in the forward-facing seat, watching the city blur past, my reflection a ghost in the tinted glass, I had to admit this was different. The women I associated with were of a certain type. Hard, polished, transactional. They knew the rules. They knew who I was. They came to me with their eyes open, seeking power or money or protection. This girl, this woman, had fallen into my lap like a sacrificial lamb, only to prove she had the teeth of a wolf. She had run. From Valerio Costanzo, from Antonio Bianchi. That took a kind of courage that bordered on suicidal, a desperation I found profoundly compelling. Marco, ever the professional, pulled the phantom into my private underground garage. The heavy steel gate rolled shut behind us, sealing us in a vault of concrete and silence. "We're secure, Don Russo," he murmured over the intercom. I didn't move. I was listening. On the other side of the partition, I heard her sharp intake of breath. The end of the line. I pressed the button. The partition slid down. She was exactly as I'd left her, a pale, beautiful disaster huddled against the door. Her dark eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on me. They weren't pleading anymore. They were watchful. The mouse was cornered, and she was smart enough to know that screaming was useless. She was just waiting. Waiting for the predator to make his move. "Out," I said. My voice was flat. I exited the car, and Marco, already at her door, pulled it open. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with a clumsy, frantic energy, she gathered the mountain of satin and lace, her movements hampered by the sheer, absurd volume of her prison. She half fell out of the car, her heels. I hadn't even seen her shoes. They were ridiculous, pearl-encrusted, hitting the concrete. She stood there, dwarfed by the massive support pillars, her chest rising and falling, her head on a swivel. She was looking for an exit, a staircase, a window. There was only the steel gate and the private elevator. I nodded to Marco. "I'll take it from here. Have my car cleaned, thoroughly." I wanted the scent of her gone from it. It was a strategic decision. It was a lie. "Don," he said, a simple acknowledgement, and disappeared into the driver's elevator, leaving us alone. "This way," I said, not looking back. I walked to the elevator, my footsteps echoing. I pressed my thumb to the biometric scanner. The brushed steel doors slid open with a soft, hydraulic hiss, revealing a cabin of black, smoked glass. She hadn't moved. I turned. Sofia. Using her name was a deliberate, calculated act, a claiming. She flinched, but she came. She walked slowly, her train dragging on the dusty concrete floor, a river of ruined, dirty white. She looked like a dove that had fallen into a slaughterhouse. She stepped into the elevator, pressing herself into the furthest corner, as far from me as she could get. The doors slid shut. We were encased in smoked glass, rising silently through the core of the building. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the mechanism. I watched her reflection. She was staring at her hands, which were fisted so tightly in her dress that her knuckles were white. The elevator didn't ding. It just stopped. The doors opened directly into my penthouse. My home was a fortress in the sky. It was a 2-story expanse of black marble, chrome, and glass, occupying the entire top 2 floors of the Russo Tower. The main room was vast, minimalist, and cold. One entire wall, 30 feet high, was a window looking out over Manhattan. The city was a carpet of glittering jewels below us, a kingdom I controlled. She stepped out, her movements hesitant, and stopped in the center of the room, a stark, white blemish on my perfect, dark floor. She looked small. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice stronger now. The shock was wearing off, being replaced by a defiant tremor. "My home," I said, walking past her to the bar. I poured a scotch. "And for now, yours." I turned, swirling the amber liquid. "Drink?" She looked at me as if I'd just grown a second head. "A drink? You look like you need one." I quote. She shook her head, a violent, jerky motion. The fire was returning. "Good. You can't keep me here." "I can," I said, taking a sip. "And I am." "My father," she started, the words a desperate, practiced threat. "He will burn this city to the ground to find me." I laughed. It was a short, dry, humorless sound. "Your father can't find a rat in his own accounting books, Principessa. He's not going to find you here. He just lost his alliance with Bianchi. He has bigger problems than a disobedient runaway daughter." "I am not an asset," she spat, the words exploding from her. I felt a genuine smile touch my lips. It was cold, I was sure, but it was real. There it is. The firecracker. "Aren't you?" I asked. "You were about to be sold." "Married," I corrected, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "To settle his debts. That's the literal definition of an asset." She was breathing hard now, her eyes, those smoky, incredible eyes, flashing with a rage that was far more beautiful than her terror. "I can pay you." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "I have trust funds," she said, her voice gaining a desperate transactional speed. "From my grandparents. It's a lot. I can get it for you. You can have all of it. Just let me go. Put me on a plane. Anywhere. I'll disappear." I walked toward her, slow, deliberate. I circled her, like a shark. I took in the dress, the ruined hair, the frantic, intelligent mind working behind those eyes. "You're trying to negotiate," I murmured. I was genuinely impressed. "I admire the attempt, but you have nothing to offer me, Sofia." "I can work," she burst out, the words shocking both of us. I'm not stupid. I see things. I see how my father's men. I can be useful. I'm good with numbers. Just don't keep me." Her voice broke on the last word. "Don't keep me." As if she were a stray. I stopped directly in front of her. She flinched but held her ground. Her chin was up, She was magnificent. And I realized, in that moment, that I was in trouble. I wanted this. I wanted this fire, this intelligence, this sheer, uncut defiance. I didn't want a broken doll. I didn't want a guest. I wanted her, which meant I had to break her just a little. I had to establish the new reality. "Let's be very clear," I said, my voice dropping to that low, intimate murmur I'd used in the car. I saw her skin prickle with goosebumps. "To your father, you were a sacrifice. To Bianchi, you were a trophy. To me." I leaned in. "You're a bargaining chip." I watched the words hit her. It was a physical blow. The last of her color drained, the fire in her eyes guttering, replaced by a cold, bleak understanding. So you'll sell me," she whispered. The hope in her voice, hope that I was just another man like her father, a man who would trade her, was a twisted, pathetic thing. It annoyed me. I didn't say that. I reached out, and this time I touched her, just one finger. I traced the line of the pearl-encrusted lace at her collarbone. She went rigid, her breathing stopping entirely, but she didn't pull away. She was frozen. "I said you were a bargaining chip," I clarified, my voice soft. "My chip. And I don't part with my property." I let the word hang in the air. Property. I saw the fight reignite. It was a tiny, furious spark in the back of her eyes. "Yes." I pulled my hand back. "You're a mess. You need to change." I turned and walked toward the long, white marble hallway that led to the residential wing. I didn't look back. I just listened. After a 3-second hesitation, I heard the shush, shush, shush of her ruined dress as she followed. I stopped at a heavy, dark wood door at the end of the hall. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. A small green light flashed, and I pushed the door open. It was a cage, but it was a gilded one. A king-sized bed with a plush velvet headboard. A wall of glass with the same staggering view as the living room. A bathroom bigger than her entire bridal chamber. A walk-in closet. She stopped in the doorway, her shoulders slumping. "A cage," she breathed. "A guest room," I countered. "The door locks from the outside. For your safety and my peace of mind." I gestured to the closet. "I'll have clothes sent up. And food. The bathroom is through there." I turned to leave. I had to get out. The air around her was too thick. "You're a monster," she said, her voice low and shaking with fury. I stopped. I turned back, leaning against the door jamb. I let my eyes trail down her, from the disheveled pearls in her hair, over the tight bodice, down to the heap of satin at her feet. "You say that like it's an insult," I said, a lazy, dangerous smile playing on my lips. "Your father, the Honorable Don Costanzo, was selling you to a geriatric pervert. I just saved you from a lifetime of that." "You didn't save me," she cried, her voice cracking. You stole me." "And you," I said, "stole my car. We all have our sins. Get some rest, Sofia." I let my gaze linger on the dress, a final, deliberate insult. "You look ridiculous." I pulled the heavy door shut, her gasp of outrage cut off by the solid wood. I heard her, a second later, hurl something at it. It must have been a lamp from the nightstand, judging by the heavy, satisfying thud and the tinkle of glass. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. The lock engaged with a solid, definitive click. I stood there in the hallway for a long moment, just listening to the silence on the other side. My blood was humming. The asset was secure. But this wasn't about an asset anymore. This wasn't about a bargaining chip. She was a firecracker. She was intelligent. And she was, without a shadow of a doubt, mine. I had a feeling that the girl I'd just locked in that room was infinitely more dangerous to me than her father and his entire organization combined. And I had never been more intrigued in my entire goddamn life.
Chapter 5. Sofia. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was more definitive than the church bells, more final than my father's bellow, more terrifying than the silent surge of the Rolls-Royce. It was the sound of a period at the end of a life sentence. For a long moment I just stared at the solid, unforgiving wood of the door. The lamp I had thrown had left a satisfying, spiderweb crack in the plaster beside the frame, but the door itself was unscratched, solid, impenetrable. "You're a monster," I had called him. "You say that like it's an insult," he'd replied. My body was vibrating, a high-frequency thrum of pure, unadulterated rage. It was so potent it eclipsed the terror. He had looked at me in that dress, the one that represented the death of my entire life, and called me ridiculous. "Ridiculous," I seethed, my voice a ragged whisper in the opulent, silent room. I looked down at myself. He was right. The 30-pound, pearl-encrusted, virgin white monstrosity was a joke. It was a costume for a sacrifice, and the ceremony had been interrupted. I was a half-slaughtered lamb. With a choked sob that was more fury than sorrow, I clawed at the back of the dress. My fingers fumbled with the 50 tiny seed pearl buttons. I couldn't reach them. I was trapped. It was designed to be put on by others, and it would have to be taken off by number. My eyes scanned the room, the broken lamp, the king-sized bed, its dark velvet headboard looking like a soft, plush coffin, the floor-to-ceiling window, a sheet of black glass that reflected my own ghostly, absurd image. My gaze landed on a heavy, crystal paperweight on the minimalist desk. I grabbed it. Without a second thought, I turned, grabbed a fistful of the satin skirt, and smashed the paperweight against the wall-length mirror. The sound was explosive. A gunshot-sharp crack, followed by the musical, cascading tinkle of 1,000 pieces of glass. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I picked up a long, sharp shard. "Ridiculous," I panted, and began to saw at the lace bodice. I didn't care about the skin I nicked. I didn't care about the pearls that scattered across the marble floor. I hacked at the boning, at the delicate illusion lace sleeves, at the suffocating satin. I tore at it, my breath coming in short, animalistic gasps. I was freeing myself. The dress finally fell away, pooling at my feet in a ruined, dirty heap. I stood there in the middle of the room, my reflection a fractured, repeating image in the broken mirror. I was wearing only the restrictive, archaic undergarments, a long-line corset, a garter belt, and silk stockings. I was half naked, bleeding from a few small cuts, and shaking. I was finally, terrifyingly, free of the bride. I walked into the bathroom. It was larger than my bedroom at home, a cave of black marble and chrome, a cavernous shower, a tub that looked like a modern art installation. I stepped under the rain shower head, not waiting for the water to warm. It hit me, ice cold, and I gasped, but I didn't move. I scrubbed at my skin until it was raw, washing off the lilies, the church, the scent of Bianchi's cologne, and the faint, lingering steel and bergamot of him. When I stepped out, shaking, I found the closet. It was, of course, stocked. He had clothes sent up. It wasn't a promise, it was a statement of fact that had already been true. But they weren't dresses. They weren't Mafia princess clothes. They were black silk pajamas, gray cashmere joggers, Soft, simple, cream-colored sweaters, black leggings. Everything was impossibly soft, impossibly expensive, and utterly impersonal. There were no colors, no patterns. It was a uniform, a prisoner's wardrobe, but a gilded one. I pulled on a pair of the silk pajamas. They felt like a second skin, cool and whispering. I felt erased. I climbed into the enormous bed that did not feel like mine, and for the first time in my life, I fell asleep without crying. I was too empty for tears. I woke to silence. For a disorienting second, I thought it was my wedding day, that the panic had just been a nightmare. Then I saw the broken mirror and the heap of ruined satin on the floor. My heart didn't pound. It just sank. A cold, heavy stone in my chest. It was real. I was a prisoner in the sky fortress of Dante, the devil Russo. I got up. The city was spread out below me, a gray, hazy, indifferent sprawl in the morning light. The view was staggering. It made me feel like an insect. I tried the door. It was, of course, locked. I was examining the biometric scanner next to it, a sleek, black panel, when a small, almost invisible slot in the wall next to the door opened. A tray slid out. I flinched back. It was a breakfast tray. A silver pot of coffee, a plate of fruit, a croissant. A silent maid, a woman with a gray, blank face, had deposited it from the hallway. She hadn't even opened the door. It was a delivery system for a high-value zoo animal. I was too hungry to be proud. I drank the coffee. It was black, strong, and so good it was almost offensive. I spent the next 2 hours pacing. My mind, now fueled and rested, was a racetrack of pure terror. What was he doing? Was he calling my father? Was he arranging the sale? He'd called me a bargaining chip. He'd called me property. He was just like my father. Just like Bianchi. He just had better taste in suits and apparently pajamas. He was waiting. He was letting me stew in this beautiful, silent, locked room. He was letting my fear build. He was waiting for my father to make the first desperate move. And then, just as I was about to throw the coffee pot at the window just to see if it would break, a sound crackled through the room. It was a speaker, hidden in the ceiling. "You're awake," Dante's voice said. It wasn't a question. I spun around looking for the source, my heart leaping into my throat. "Where are you?" "I have visitors," he said, his voice a dispassionate, smooth baritone in the air around me. "They're here for you. I thought you should listen in." Before I could ask, before I could even process, another voice filled the room. "Russo! You son of a bitch, I know she's here." My blood froze. My father. It was him. Valerio Costanzo. His voice was tinny over the speaker, but the impotent, blustering rage was unmistakable. "Valerio!" Bianchi Dante's voice was calm, amused. I could hear the smile in it. "Coffee. Or is it a bit early for scotch?" "You will give her back now," another voice snarled. A voice I had been dreading. Antonio Bianchi. It was a wet, gravelly sound, like a reptile clearing its throat. "The girl is mine. She humiliated me. She humiliated the Costanzo family. She will be punished, and then the wedding will proceed." My stomach clenched. I felt the acid rise in my throat. "She doesn't belong to you, Antonio," my father cut in. His voice panicked. "She belongs to me. And you, Russo, you have committed an act of war, taking my daughter." "Taking?" Dante's voice was like silk. "My apologies. I was under the impression she ran from you, that she dove into my car, begging to be taken anywhere but the altar you were sacrificing her on. My mistake." There was a heavy silence. "It doesn't matter," my father spat. "She's an asset of the Costanzo family." "You will name your price, Russo." "What is it? Money?" Territory? What will it take to return the girl? I held my breath. My hands were fisted at my sides, my nails biting into my palms. This was it. The negotiation. I was a bargaining chip. I was property. I was about to be sold. Again. I was just waiting to see who the new highest bidder was. There is no price, Valerio, Dante said, his voice bored. Don't play games, Bianchi roared. She is a faithless, disobedient creature. When I get her back, I will teach her a lesson she will never— You'll what? Dante's voice had changed. The amusement was gone. It was flat. It was cold. It was the sound of a blade being unsheathed. You'll what? He repeated, dangerously soft. I will have my due, Bianchi stammered, his bravado faltering. Let me be very clear, gentlemen, Dante said, and his voice was so low, so full of lethal promise that I flinched, alone in my room. Sofia Costanzo is no longer a Costanzo. She's no longer your concern, Bianchi. What are you saying? My father whispered. She's not. She's mine. No, Dante said. She's mine. She fell into my car, and I'm keeping her. She is under my protection. My breath hitched. I think I stopped breathing altogether. Protection. My father's voice was a hysterical screech. You think this is protection? You've just started a war. We will burn you. You will do nothing, Dante interrupted, his voice a sudden hard crack of a whip. You're a dying animal, Valerio, and you were trying to graft yourself onto Bianchi's corpse to survive. The alliance is dead. Your daughter's escape just gave you an excuse. You have no money, you have no power, and you have no daughter. And you, Bianchi? Dante continued, his voice lethally calm again. I want you to listen to me. If you ever say her name again, if you think of her again, if you send so much as a stray dog to sniff around my property, I will have your hands cut off, and then I will have you buried alive. Am I clear? The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear my father's wheezing, frantic breath over the speaker. I heard Bianchi make a small, choked sound. She's a bargaining chip, I whispered to the empty room. He said, Get out of my building, Dante's voice commanded. I heard the sound of chairs scraping, of panicked, stumbling footsteps, and then the audio clicked off. Silence. I stood in the middle of the room, my entire body shaking. He hadn't sold me. He hadn't traded me. My father had arrived, ready to bargain for his asset. My groom had arrived, ready to claim his property. And Dante Russo, the devil, the monster, the man who had stolen me and locked me in a cage, had looked at both of them and said, No. He said, She's mine. He said, She is under my protection. He hadn't saved me. I knew that. He'd claimed me. He'd kept me to spite them, to ruin their alliance, to take what they valued most. He'd kept me like a prized, stolen racehorse, but he kept me. He had just declared war on 2 families for a girl he'd met less than 24 hours ago. A girl he'd called a bargaining chip. A cold, terrifying, and utterly alien feeling bloomed in my chest. It was the first time in my entire life that anyone had ever chosen me. The line between monster and protector didn't just blur. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, just like the mirror I was staring at. And I didn't know if the man who had just defended me was any less terrifying than the men who had just tried to buy me.
Chapter 6. Dante. I watched Costanzo and Bianchi scurry out of my office, their bluster replaced by the chalky, ashen terror of men who had just seen their own graves. Bianchi was visibly shaking. Valerio looked like he'd aged 20 years. Good. I stood at the window of my office, 30 floors above the chaos, and watched their insignificant black car pull away from my building. The meeting had been an indulgence, a necessary one. I hadn't needed to have them brought here. I could have sent the message via Marco, but I'd wanted to see their faces. I'd wanted to watch the arrogance drain from Bianchi's eyes when I threatened to take his hands. I'd wanted to smell their fear. It was a satisfying, familiar appetizer, but it wasn't the main course. My intercom buzzed. Marco. They're gone, Don Russo. No incidents. Good. Send Moretti in and clean the conference room. I don't want the smell of them in here. I clicked off the intercom and turned, rolling my shoulders to dissipate the last of the cold rage. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, leaving something else in its wake. Agitation. I had just drawn a line in the sand with two major families. I'd essentially declared war, not for territory, not for a shipment, but for a girl. A girl who, at this very moment, was locked in my guest room. My men were loyal, but they weren't stupid. They would see this as a liability, a dangerous, emotional indulgence. I had called her property and under my protection. I had acted like a king claiming a spoil of war. And the truth was, I had no idea why. It wasn't strategic. It was possessive. The moment Bianchi, that fat, wheezing pig, had spoken of teaching her a lesson, I'd felt a primitive, white-hot spike of rage so profound it had nearly made me pull the trigger on him right there in my office. This was a problem. A beautiful, infuriating firecracker of a problem, and I had to decide what to do with it. Adriano Moretti, my cousin and CFO, entered, all slicked-back hair and a nervous, obsequious energy that always set my teeth on edge. Dante, you wanted to see me? The Costanzo-Bianchi merger is dead, I said, walking to my desk. Costanzo's daughter ran. She's here. Adriano's eyes widened. Here? In the building? Dante, I'm handling it. What I need from you is a full financial press on Costanzo. Freeze his offshore accounts. Call in his markers. I want him bankrupt by Friday. Of course, Adriano said, already typing on his tablet. But Dante, the rumor was he was settling his debt to you with the Bianchi merger. This complicates things. It simplifies them, I said, my voice cold. He no longer has an asset to sell. He's a lame horse. Shoot him. Yes, Don. And the girl? The girl is my asset now, I said, the words tasting like a lie. She was no one's asset. That's all. Adriano nodded, but his eyes were full of questions I had no intention of answering. He left. I sat at my desk, the silence of the office pressing in. My asset was one floor above, in a room with a broken lamp, a smashed mirror, and a shredded $30,000 wedding dress. She was not a weeping damsel. She was a destructive, bored, and highly intelligent captive. And boredom, in my experience, was more dangerous than rage. I had to see her. I had to establish the new reality. This thing between us couldn't be just captor and captive. That was unstable. That was a liability. I took the private stairs up to the residence. I stood outside her door for a long moment. I heard nothing. No crying, no smashing, just silence. I pressed my thumb to the scanner. The lock clicked open. I pushed the door open. The room was a disaster area. The mirror was a glittering spray of glass shards across the black marble. The wedding dress was in a heap, looking like a butchered swan, and in the middle of it all, she was sitting cross-legged on the bed, wearing the black silk pajamas I'd provided. They were too big for her, sliding off one shoulder, making her look small and delicate, which was a dangerous illusion. Her dark hair was a damp, tangled mess from the shower. She wasn't crying. She was reading. I'd had a stack of books put in the room. Market analyses, global finance, dry, dense tomes I used for my legitimate businesses. She was halfway through the principles of macroeconomics, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't look up until I was fully in the room. When she did, her eyes weren't terrified. They were cold, wary. "I heard the meeting," she said, her voice a low, raspy thing. "I intended for you to... You threatened to kill them." "I threatened to maim one and bankrupt the other," I corrected, walking into the room. I nudged the ruined dress with the toe of my shoe. "You've been busy." "It was ridiculous," she said, her eyes following my foot. I had to suppress a smile. "So you destroyed it. And my mirror." "It was an accident." "And the lamp?" "That one was on purpose," she said, her chin lifting. I laughed, a real, actual laugh. It shocked me as much as it did her. Her eyes widened. "You're not a very good prisoner, Sofia," I said, walking toward the window. "I don't want to be your prisoner," she said, her voice tight. You called me. You said I was yours." "I did." "Why?" she demanded, scrambling to her knees on the bed. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. You're just like them. You're claiming me like a car." "If you were a car," I said, turning to face her, "I'd be angry about the mirror." "Get dressed." "What?" "Get dressed," I repeated, my patience snapping. "You're bored." "I am annoyed, and I have a theory I'd like to test." I didn't wait. I walked out, leaving the door open. A minute later, she appeared in the hallway, dressed in the gray cashmere joggers and a black sweater. Her feet were bare. She looked like a ghost, all huge, haunted eyes and pale skin, but she was standing tall. "Where are we going?" "To work," I said. I led her down the stairs and into my office. I sat at my desk. She stood in the middle of the room, looking as out of place as her wedding dress had been. "You said you were good with numbers," I said, pulling up a file on my massive desktop screen. I am." "You said you could be useful." She just nodded, her eyes fixed on me. "Good. Because my cousin, Adriano, who you just met, he's a moron, and I have a rat in my organization." I gestured to the sleek glass conference table in the corner of my office. A new laptop was already there. "I have a shipping company, one of my legitimate ones. For the last 6 months, someone has been skimming. It's not enough to be ruinous, but it's enough to be insulting. My auditors have been over it 3 times. They can't find the bleed." I leaned back, steepling my fingers. "They're looking for a flaw in the expenditures. I want you to look. Find what they missed." She stared at me. You're giving me your books?" "I'm giving you a test, Principessa. Don't disappoint me." For a long moment, she just stood there. Then, a tiny, almost invisible spark ignited in her eyes. It was the spark from the car, the defiance, the intelligence. She was a prisoner being offered a puzzle. She walked to the table, sat down, and opened the laptop. And for the next 4 hours, The only sound in my office was the soft click of her fingers on the keyboard and the whisper of the ventilation. I did my own work. I made calls. I signed documents. I orchestrated the financial ruin of her father. But I wasn't working. I was watching her. I watched her pull her hair back, twisting it into a knot with a pen she'd found. I watched her bite her lower lip, her teeth worrying the plush skin as she cross-referenced spreadsheets. I watched the way the cashmere pooled at her narrow waist, the way her bare feet were tucked under her on the chair. She was mesmerizing. She wasn't a princess. She wasn't a damsel. She was a scholar. She was focused in a way that was absolute. This wasn't a game to her. She was solving the puzzle. My irritation was growing. It was a low, simmering heat in my gut. This was not supposed to be happening. I was not supposed to be this distracted. I was the Don. I did not get distracted by bare-shouldered, barefoot women in my office. It was 2 a.m. I was on my second scotch. The city was a dark, glittering void outside the glass. "Got it," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. I looked up. "What?" "I found it." She didn't look up from the screen. "Your auditors are morons." I put my glass down, slowly. I stood up and walked over to her. I stood behind her, close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin, close enough to smell the soap from her hair. She tensed, her shoulders going rigid, but she didn't move. "Show me," I commanded, my voice a low rumble. You're looking in the wrong place," she said, her voice shaking slightly, but her words sharp, clinical. "You're looking at the expenditures. The theft isn't there. It's in the revenue projections." She pointed to a line item. "Here. Your projections for fuel surcharges. For the last 6 months, they've been padded by, on average, 2.8%. It's a small enough number to look like a standard market fluctuation." She clicked another window. "But that 2.8% overage isn't being routed back to the main profit and loss. It's being diverted to a shell holding. Tri-state logistics." My blood went cold. "Your books match," she said, her finger tracing the line on the screen. "The projected revenue and the actual revenue are balanced, because the baseline projection was a lie. Someone is stealing from you before the money even hits your account." I stared at the screen. My auditors, my entire finance team, had missed it. For 6 months. And she had found it in 4 hours. "Who," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "is authorizing the projections?" She clicked one more time. A digital signature flashed on the bottom of the ledger. A.M. Adriano Moretti. My cousin. The man who had been in this office not 8 hours ago. She went utterly still. She knew. She had to know. She had signed the man's death warrant. "He's family," she whispered, her voice sick. I didn't say anything. I was too stunned. Stunned at the betrayal, stunned at her. I reached around her, my hand brushing her shoulder, and closed the laptop. The sudden click made her jump. "You're not good with numbers, Sofia," I murmured, my lips close to her ear. I felt her shiver, a full-body tremor. "You're a goddamn surgeon." She was pale, her eyes wide, staring at the blank screen. She had just stepped off a cliff, and she knew it. He'll know it was me," she breathed. "He won't know anything," I said. He won't be in a position to... I stepped back, the spell breaking. She was a weapon, a brilliant, sharp, beautiful weapon that I'd just aimed at my own organization. What happens now? She asked, turning in the chair to look up at me. Her eyes were dark, full of a terrifying new understanding. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was an accessory. Now, I said, you're no longer my guest. I leaned down, bracing my hands on the arms of her chair, caging her in. Her scent, that clean, warm, female scent, flooded my senses. She was trapped. We both were. You're my accountant, and tomorrow, I'm going to show you the real books. Her breath hitched. She knew what that meant. The black books, the real empire. This, I thought, as I looked into her terrified, intelligent, defiant eyes, was a much better cage, and infinitely more dangerous.
Chapter 7. Sofia. For 2 weeks, my world was a cage of numbers. The gilded guest room was no longer my prison. The entire penthouse was. Dante had been true to his word. The morning after I'd found the rat in his books, he'd brought me into his office. My office, he'd called it, a glass-walled room adjoining his own, and given me access to the real books, the black books. If I'd been an accessory before, I was now a co-conspirator. I wasn't just his accountant, I was his confessor. I saw the tributaries of his empire, the rivers of blood money that flowed from casinos, ports, and private equity into the clean, sparkling lakes of his legitimate businesses. My father's organization was a child's lemonade stand by comparison. Dante Russo didn't just run the city. He owned its veins. And I was the one counting the blood cells. I learned his rhythms. He was a creature of absolute ironclad discipline. He rose at 5, worked out for an hour in his private gym. I could hear the percussive thwack, thwack, thwack of his fists on the heavy bag, and was at his desk by 7, a black coffee in hand. We worked in silence, the only sound the click of our keyboards. Sometimes hours would pass, and I would forget he was there. Then I would feel it, the prickle on the back of my neck. I would look up and find his eyes on me through the glass partition, his gaze so heavy it felt like a physical weight. He wasn't watching me for mistakes. He was just watching. The door to my room was no longer locked. I had the run of the penthouse. But I was more trapped than ever. Where would I go? I had seen his ledgers. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically and in a few cases, literally. I had signed my own death warrant just by existing. And Adriano Moretti? He was simply gone. He'd been on the schedule for a board meeting one day, and the next, his name was erased from every document, his accounts absorbed, his existence scrubbed. Dante never mentioned it. He didn't have to. The message was clear. I was useful, so I was safe. Until I wasn't. One night I was deep in a logistics file, tracing a shipment of... well, I'd learned not to ask what, when his voice came over the office intercom, jarring me from my concentration. "Stop, we're going out." I froze. My blood ran cold. "Out?" "Get dressed," his voice commanded. "I've had clothes left on your bed." "We leave in 20 minutes. I walked to my room, my heart a cold, panicked bird in my chest. Out was not the penthouse. Out was the world. Out was where people like my father and Antonio Bianchi existed. On the bed there was no prisoner's uniform of cashmere. There was a dress. It was a slip of midnight blue velvet, so dark it was almost black. It had a modest cowl neck, thin straps, and it fell to just below the knee. It was simple, severe, and I knew without touching it, astronomically expensive. It was the armor of a different kind of woman, a woman who didn't run. It slid over my skin like water. When I looked in the new mirror, a replacement had arrived the same day I'd smashed the old one. I didn't see Sofia Costanzo. I saw a stranger. A pale, dark-haired, hollow-eyed woman draped in the color of Dante Russo's power. He was waiting by the elevator, a vision in a black, custom-tailored suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. His eyes raked over me, a slow, appreciative, possessive inventory. "Good," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't offer his arm. He just placed his hand on the small of my back. I flinched. It was the first time he'd touched me since that night in his office, when he'd caged me in the chair. His hand was a brand, a heavy, searing weight that staked his claim. It wasn't a gentleman's gesture. It was an owner's. We rode the private elevator down to the garage. A different car was waiting. Not the Phantom, but a low-slung, aggressive-looking black Ferrari. He opened my door. I slid in, and the world outside the penthouse swallowed me whole. He drove with a fast, controlled, lethal grace, his one hand effortless on the wheel. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The Silencio," he said. My stomach dropped. I knew the name. It was the club. The one place where all the families met on neutral ground. It was a no-fly zone, a sanctuary where business was discussed and blood was forbidden. My father had been there. "Why?" I breathed, my hands fisted in the velvet. "Because I'm tired of being in the penthouse," he said simply, as if he were taking me to the movies. "And I want you to be seen." I want you to be seen. He wasn't taking me out. He was displaying me. The club was all dark wood, cigar smoke, and hushed, dangerous voices. It wasn't loud. It was the opposite. The silence was the point. It was a cathedral of power, and every man in it was a cardinal of some dark, bloody faith. And I, it seemed, was the new relic on the altar. The moment we walked in, the quiet hum of conversation died. Every eye in the room, and they were all men, snapped to us. To me. Dante's hand was still on my back, his thumb tracing a slow, proprietary circle that made my skin burn. I could feel the stares like insects. I recognized faces. Men who had kissed my father's cheek. Men who had patted my head as a child, calling me Principessa. Their faces were now masks of shock or fear or cold calculation. They didn't see Sofia Costanzo. They saw Dante Russo's new, what? His whore? His captive? His accountant? He guided me to a secluded, velvet-upholstered booth in the back. He ordered a scotch for himself and, without asking me, a glass of Sancerre. "They're all staring," I murmured, my hands shaking as I picked up the glass. "Let them," he said, his eyes scanning the room, cold and confident. He was a lion in his den, and every other man here was a hyena, and they all knew it. "This is a mistake," I said. You're showing me to them." "I am," he said, his gaze finally settling on me. "I'm showing them that what's mine stays mine." His words hit me and I couldn't breathe. He was talking about me. He was telling the entire underworld that I was his property. A man approached the table, old, with a face like a dried-up riverbed. He nodded, his eyes flicking to me. "Don Russo, a surprise to see you here?" "Gallo," Dante nodded. "The scotch is good tonight." "It is." You come with a new associate." "My accountant," Dante said, the word a silken, cold knife. "Sofia. She's been invaluable." The old man's eyes widened. He understood the implication. The Costanzo girl wasn't just his captive. She was in his business. I wasn't a hostage. I was a traitor. My father's last shred of honor was gone. I felt sick. I needed air. "Excuse me," I whispered, sliding out of the booth. Dante's eyes snapped to me, a silent question. The restroom?" I stammered. His gaze held me for a second, then he gave a curt nod. I walked across the thick carpet, my heels sinking, feeling the weight of those dozens of eyes on my back. I was a target. I was almost at the arched hallway when a hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Hard. "You," a voice slurred. A voice I had prayed I would never hear again. I turned and my heart stopped. Antonio Bianchi. He was drunk, his face a blotchy, furious red, his small, piggish eyes narrowed in hatred. His grip on my bicep was a vice. "You think you're so smart," he spat, his hot, sour breath hitting my face. "Running from me? Hiding with him?" "Let go of me," I said, my voice shaking, trying to pull my arm back. "He's not even fucking you, is he?" Bianchi laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "He's just using you to make us look like fools. You're his little pet. His dog." "Antonio, let go." "You're my property," he snarled, yanking me closer. The club was still silent, everyone watching. "You're a Costanzo whore. You should have been on your knees thanking God I was willing to—" It didn't even register as movement. 1 second, Bianchi was snarling in my face, his fingers digging into my arm. The next, he was gone. He was slammed against the paneled wall, his feet dangling, a hand at his throat. The sound of his head hitting the wood was a sick, wet thud. Dante. He hadn't been behind me. He'd been across the room. I hadn't even seen him stand up. The entire club was frozen. Dante wasn't looking at Bianchi. He was looking at my arm, at the red, angry fingerprints already forming where Bianchi had grabbed me. His face. It was not the face of the man I worked with. It was not the face of the man in the penthouse. It was a mask of cold, inhuman, absolute rage. It was the face of the devil. Bianchi gurgled, his eyes wide and panicked, clawing at Dante's wrist. Dante's gaze lifted slowly, from my arm to Bianchi's face. "I told you!" Dante's voice wasn't a shout. It was a whisper. A sibilant, terrifying hiss that carried across the entire silent room. "I told you what would happen if you said her name." And then I saw it. The glint of silver. A stiletto. Thin, sharp, and pressed just under Bianchi's chin, the tip breaking the skin. A single, perfect drop of blood welled up and rolled slowly down his neck. "Dante?" I whispered, my voice a thread. "Now you touch her?" Dante murmured, his voice almost conversational, as if he were genuinely curious. He pressed the knife a fraction of an inch deeper. Bianchi made a choked, dying sound. "Russo," old Gallo said, his voice a panicked plea. "This is neutral ground. Sangue è proibito, blood is forbidden." Dante didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on Bianchi. I should have been sick. I should have been screaming. I was watching a man, a monster about to execute my former fiancé in the middle of a crowded room. For me. And my heart was not pounding with fear. It was pounding with something else. Something dark and hot and terrifyingly powerful. He had moved like a god of death. He had defended me. He had seen the marks on my skin, and he was ready to kill for it. "Dante!" I said again, my voice stronger. His head snapped toward me. His eyes were black, bottomless pits of pure, undiluted violence. For a second, I thought he was going to turn that rage on me. Then, with a sound of pure disgust, he released Bianchi. He didn't just let him go. He threw him. Bianchi crumpled to the floor, a boneless heap, choking and clutching at his bleeding neck. Dante didn't look at him again. He didn't look at anyone. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was steel. It was just as hard as Bianchi's, but it was different. It wasn't a grab, it was a claim. "We're leaving," he bit out. He didn't walk. He dragged me. He hauled me through the silent, parted sea of men, his grip bruising, his shoulders rigid. We burst out of the heavy wooden doors and into the cold night air. He didn't let go. He dragged me to the car, wrenched the passenger door open, and all but threw me inside. The drive back was a suffocating, explosive silence. He said nothing. He just drove, his hands strangling the steering wheel, the muscles in his jaw so tight I thought they would snap. The rage was rolling off him in palpable, toxic waves. I didn't dare speak. I just sat there, my entire body thrumming, the mark on my bicep burning, the mark on my wrist, where he held me, burning hotter. The second we were in the private elevator, he was on me. The second the doors slid shut, he slammed his hand against the wall, his arm caging me in. "He touched you," he growled. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I was pressed against the smoked glass, his body a wall of heat and muscle in front of me, his face inches from mine. His eyes were still black. "Dante?" I gasped, my hands flat against his chest. I could feel his heart hammering, a violent runaway beat that matched my own. "He put his filthy hands on you," he snarled, his voice a low, ragged thing. He was breathing hard, as if he'd just run a mile. You almost killed him?" "He should be dead," he whispered, and I realized he was shaking, not from fear, from restraint. "He put his hands on what is mine." He leaned in, his forehead pressing against mine, his eyes closed, his breathing hot on my lips. "You," he growled, "will never be touched by another man." It wasn't a promise of protection. It was a vow of possession. It was a threat to the rest of the world. "Do you understand me?" he demanded, his eyes snapping open, boring into mine. I was trapped. By his body. By his rage. By the terrifying, addictive, dark feeling coiling in my own stomach. I couldn't speak. I just gave a short, terrified, jerky nod. He stared at me for another second, his chest heaving. Then, as if my nod had been a bucket of ice water, his control snapped back into place. He pushed himself off the wall, stepping back. The heat was gone, replaced by the familiar, cold, lethal calm. When the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, he stepped out without looking at me, his suit perfectly unruffled. "Go to bed, Sofia," he said, his voice flat as he walked to the bar. "You're done for the night." I stumbled out, my legs shaking, and fled to my room, my skin still burning where he hadn't even touched me.
Chapter 8. Dante. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving me alone in the penthouse. The silence was a pressure cooker. I didn't move. I stood in the middle of the vast, empty foyer, listening to the echo of her bare feet running on the marble, the sound of her bedroom door closing, not slamming, closing. A sound of retreat. My hand was shaking. I looked down at it, clenching it into a fist. It was an alien, traitorous thing. I had not shaken, not from adrenaline, not from rage, not from fear, since I was 15 years old, watching my father bleed out on a warehouse floor. I was shaking now. With a low, guttural snarl, I tore at my suit jacket, ripping it from my shoulders and throwing it to the floor. I stalked to the bar, my blood a hot, toxic sludge in my veins. I grabbed the first bottle I touched, a $20,000 scotch, and ripped the crystal stopper out. I didn't bother with a glass. I drank, the liquid fire a pale imitation of the inferno in my gut. He should be dead. The thought was a repeating, rhythmic drumbeat. He should be dead. I had him. The tip of my blade was on his pulse. I could have ended him. Sangue e proibito be damned. I could have slit his throat, gutted him in front of all of them, and not a single man in that room would have raised a hand to stop me. They saw my face. They knew. But I'd stopped. She had stopped me. Her voice. Dante. It had cut through the white-hot fog of my rage like a surgeon's blade. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't cried. She had said my name, her voice strong, and it had been like a chain around my neck, yanking me back from the edge. I slammed the bottle down on the marble bar, a small, sharp crack spider-webbing from the impact. This was a disaster. I had spent 2 weeks convincing myself that this arrangement was a matter of utility. She was a weapon. She was a tool, an asset, a brilliant, beautiful, razor-sharp tool that I could aim at my enemies. I told myself her presence in my office was a convenience, that watching her through the glass was just supervision. I was a goddamn liar. I had been watching her the way a starving man watches a banquet. I'd memorized the way she bit her lower lip when she was deep in a ledger, the way she pulled her dark, messy hair into a knot with one of my pens, the way the simple, sterile cashmere I'd bought her clung to the curve of her waist. I hadn't been supervising. I had been consumed. And tonight, I had walked into that club with her on my arm, not to show them she was mine, but to prove it to myself. Then Bianchi, that fat, sweating, pathetic vermin, had put his hands on her. I'd seen the red, angry fingerprints on her pale skin, and in that second, my control, my discipline, the ironclad, cold, calculating shell I had built my entire empire upon, had shattered. It wasn't the dawn of the Russo family who had crossed that room. It was something primal, something animal. It was jealousy. It was a raw, possessive, ugly, and all-consuming jealousy so potent it had left me shaking. I hadn't just wanted to kill him for his disrespect. I had wanted to eradicate him for the sacrilege of his touch. He put his filthy hands on you. My own words in the elevator echoed back at me. The accusation. The rage. I had terrified her. I had seen it in her eyes. That flicker of the same fear she'd had in the church. The fear she'd had for Bianchi. That I had put that look there. It made me want to burn the city to the ground. Go to bed, Sofia. I dismissed her, like a child, like a servant. I had pushed her away because if I hadn't, I would have done exactly what I was thinking about doing right now. I needed to see her. I needed to see the mark on her arm. I needed to know if it was still there. I needed to see that his touch hadn't stained her. I moved. I didn't think. I just walked, my footsteps silent on the marble, my entire body a live wire. I walked down the hall to her room. The door was closed. I didn't knock. I pressed my thumb to the scanner I'd had installed, the one that only my print and hers could open. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open. She was there, not in bed, not crying. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, her back to me, her arms wrapped around her own waist, a defensive, self-protective posture. She was still in the velvet dress. She looked out at the glittering, indifferent city lights, a prisoner in a tower, and she was so still. I told you to go to bed, I said. My voice was a low, rough rasp. She flinched, her shoulders tensing, but she didn't turn around. I'm not your dog, Dante, she said, her voice quiet, but not weak. It was cold. You don't get to dismiss me. A slow, dangerous smile touched my lips. Even now, after all that, she had fire. What did you want me to do, Sofia? Stay? Watch me finish the scotch? Or maybe you wanted me to go back and finish the other job? That made her turn. Her face was pale, her eyes huge and dark, the blue dress a slash of midnight against her skin. There was no terror in her expression now. It was gone, replaced by a deep, weary anger. Why? She whispered. Why did you do that? He touched you. Don't, she snapped, her voice cracking. Don't say that. Don't act like that was about me. That was about you. That was about your pride, your property. You humiliated me. What? I took a step into the room. I was so taken aback I could barely process the words. I protected you. I defended your honor. You have no idea what my honor is, she cried, taking a step toward me. She was shaking, but with fury, not fear. You think my honor is in you putting a knife to a man's throat. You think it's in claiming me like a chair you don't want anyone else to sit in? You stood there and told the entire world I was your thing. I told them you were mine, I growled, advancing on her. There is a difference. There is no difference, she shot back, but she took a step back. You're just like him, just like my father. You're a monster in a better suit. I am nothing like them. Then why are you doing this? She demanded, her voice breaking on a sob of pure frustration. Why did you take me? Why did you keep me? Why won't you just let me go? She took another step back, and her calves hit the leg of the chaise lounge. She was trapped. I was on her in a second. I didn't slam her against the wall. I just moved. I crowded her, my body a wall, forcing her to either sit or fall. She sank onto the chaise, her hands splayed. I braced my hands on either side of her, caging her in, just as I had in the elevator. But this was no elevator. This was her room. This was her bed. The air was thick with her scent, soap and fear and a sharp female anger that was the most potent aphrodisiac I had ever known. Why? She breathed, her eyes wide, locked on mine. She was terrified again, but she wasn't cowering. She was defiant. I stared at her mouth, her full, trembling, defiant lower lip, at the pulse hammering in her throat, at the pale, perfect skin of her shoulder, where the velvet strap had slipped down. I had been lying, to my men, to my family, to her. But most of all, I had been lying to myself. You want to know why? I murmured. My voice was a low, ragged confession. I'm not doing this for your honor. I'm not doing it for my pride. I leaned in, my mouth hovering an inch from hers. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, her chest rising and falling. I'm doing this, I whispered, because the moment you fell into my car, you were already mine. Her breath hitched, her eyes fluttered. I'm doing this, I continued, my lips brushing hers as I spoke, because I watched you find a flaw in my books that my entire team of experts missed, and I realized you were more dangerous than any man in my organization. Her fingers gripped the silk of the chaise, her knuckles white. I'm doing this, I whispered, my nose tracing the line of her jaw, because I saw you in this blue dress, and the thought of any other man in that club even looking at you made me want to tear their eyes out. I pulled back, just enough to see her face. Her eyes were glazed, her lips parted. She was lost. "And I'm doing this," I growled, my control finally snapping, "because that pig put his hands on you, and I am going to erase the very memory of his touch." I didn't give her time to answer. I didn't give her time to think. I crashed my mouth down on hers. It was not a kiss. It was a claiming. It was a brutal, desperate, starved act of possession. It was all the rage from the club, all the jealousy, all the late night at the desk obsession, all the white-knuckled restraint from the elevator, unleashed in a single, devastating moment. I kissed her like I wanted to own her, like I wanted to brand her from the inside out. My hand came up, not gently, and fisted in her hair, tilting her head back, deepening the angle. My other hand snaked around her waist, yanking her off the chaise and flush against my body. She stumbled, her hands flying to my chest, and she made a small, broken sound in the back of her throat. I thought she would fight. I expected her to hit me, to claw at me. I was wrong. For a second, she was frozen, a statue of pure shock. And then she kissed me back. Her hands, which were flat against my chest in a weak protest, suddenly fisted in my shirt. She wasn't pushing me away. She was holding on, her mouth, which had been a trembling line of resistance, softened, opened, and met my punishing assault with a desperate, frantic hunger of her own. It was gasoline on a wildfire. My low groan was ripped from my chest. This wasn't a seduction. This was a surrender. Mine. I was lost. She was fire, and she was rage, and she was mine. She was everything. I broke the kiss, only to slam my mouth against the soft skin of her jaw, her throat. I tasted her pulse, which was a frantic, wild drumbeat against my lips. Mine. I growled against her skin. "You are mine, Sofia. Not your father's. Not Bianchi's. Mine." I pressed her back, my body pinning her against the wall, my hand still tangled in her hair, and I took her mouth again, swallowing the gasp that escaped her. I was the devil, and I was finally claiming my soul.
Chapter 9. Sofia. The world was two hands, a wall, and a mouth. Dante's mouth was not gentle, or coaxing, or romantic. It was a plundering. It was a desperate, angry claiming, a bruising force of nature that demanded and took and gave nothing back but heat. His hand was a vice in my hair, tilting my head, holding me in place for the onslaught. My back was pressed to the cold, hard wall, his body an iron cage, and for a terrifying, heart-stopping second, I couldn't breathe. I was being kissed by the devil, and I was drowning in the inferno. He's a monster. He's just like them. The thought screamed in my head, a thin, reedy sound of panic. But my body, my traitorous, starved, terrified body, had other ideas. When my hands had flown up to his chest, they had meant to push. They had meant to fight, to claw, to reject this final, brutal act of possession. But the second my palms met the solid, rock-hard wall of his chest, they stopped. They didn't push. They clung. And as his mouth ravaged mine, a different, darker, hotter thought rose up and strangled the panic. But he's not like them. My father had sold me. Antonio Bianchi had grabbed me, his touch a violation. Dante Russo, the monster who held my life in his hands, had just put a knife to a man's throat for me. He had declared me his in front of the entire world. And now he was kissing me like I was the only thing in that world. Not with lust, not even with desire, but with a raw, desperate, all-consuming need that mirrored the one I had been hiding from myself. He broke the kiss. Our chests were heaving, our breath mingling, hot and ragged. His forehead dropped to rest against mine. His eyes were closed, his jaw tight, the hand in my hair still fisted, his other arm locked around my waist, holding me up. I think my legs had given out. "Mine," he breathed again, the word a ragged groan against my lips. He was shaking. The man of iron and ice, the devil himself, was shaking. And that was what broke me. A sound, half sob, half gasp, tore from my throat, and I kissed him back. It wasn't a return of his savagery. It was a surrender. My fingers fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and my mouth found his, no longer a victim but a participant. It was a desperate, frantic, hopeless kiss. It was the kiss of a prisoner who had just been handed the key, only to realize it was to a different, more dangerous cage. It was a plea. Don't hurt me. Don't let them hurt me. Keep me. He deepened the kiss instantly, his groan of triumph vibrating through my entire body. He swept me off my feet, literally, one arm scooping under my legs, the other supporting my back, and carried me from the wall. My heart stopped. This is it. But he didn't carry me to the bed. He carried me out of my room, down the silent, moonlit hallway and into his. His room was dark, vast, and cold. It smelled of him. Cedar, ozone, and expensive, clean mail. He didn't turn on a light. He just walked to the massive bed and deposited me in the center of it, a sacrifice on a dark altar. He stood over me, a shadow against the city lights, his chest heaving. I was on my knees on his bed, the velvet dress bunched at my hips, my hair a wild mess, my lips swollen and bruised from his. I was terrified. He didn't move. He just watched me. And I watched him. The man who had confessed his obsession. The man who had claimed me. I could see his hands, clenched and unclenched at his sides. He was fighting a war with himself. A war he was, for the first time, in danger of losing. After a lifetime of silence, I finally found my voice. What? What do you want from me, Dante? I whispered it to the shadow. His answer was a long time coming. When it did, his voice was a raw, shredded thing. Everything, he whispered. And then he turned, walked out of the room and closed the door, leaving me, alone, in his bed. I didn't sleep. I sat there trembling in the center of his massive, empty bed until the sun came up. I was drowning in his scent. I was a confused, tangled, aching mass of shame and fear, and a terrible, terrible relief. He hadn't touched me. He'd kissed me like he owned my soul, but he had not. He'd had me. I was his. He could have taken anything. And he'd walked away. The morning after was a cold, sharp, sterile silence. I showered in his bathroom, a cavern of black marble, and found my own clothes, the cashmere uniform, neatly folded on the vanity. I was a prisoner again. A pet. A dog, just as Bianchi had said. My face burned with shame. I had kissed him back. I had wanted him. And he had rejected me. He had proven his point, that he could, and then left me, a spoiled, discarded toy. I walked into the office, my heart a cold stone. I was ready for a new set of rules, for the jeering, for the cold indifference. He was already there. At his desk, on the phone. He was Don Russo again. The suit was perfect, the hair immaculate. He looked as if he had slept for 8 hours. He saw me enter, and his eyes... nothing. No heat. No anger, no possession. They were the same cold, calculating eyes that had looked at me over the ledgers. He didn't acknowledge the kiss. He didn't acknowledge that I had woken up in his bed. He just nodded. Once. To the chair. My humiliation was so profound, so complete, I felt dizzy. I had been a fool. He was like them. He was just a better, more patient, more cruel monster. He had broken me, and he hadn't even had to lay a hand on me. I sat. I opened the laptop. I stared at the numbers, but they were just meaningless symbols. My entire body was a single raw nerve. He's playing with you. You're a mouse. The doors to the office burst open. It was so sudden, so violent that I screamed. It was Marco, his head of security. His face was gray, his eyes wide with panic. "Don Russo!" he gasped, not even seeing me. We have a problem. A big one." Dante was on his feet in an instant, the cold facade gone, replaced by the lethal energy from the club. "What?" "Pier 12, Marco said, his voice tight. "They hit us 10 minutes ago. It wasn't a warning, boss. It was a message." "How bad?" Dante said, his voice a low, cold vibration. "They hit the medical supplies shipment, the one bound for the children's hospital. They torched the trucks, the whole warehouse." Marco's voice broke. "They didn't just burn the shipment, Dante. They waited. Our guys, they were ambushed. We lost 3 men. Sal and the 2 new kids, executed." The air left my lungs. My hand flew to my mouth, a choked, sick sound escaping. 3 men, dead, because of me. Because I'd been seen with Dante, because he had claimed me, my father. Bianchi. This was their answer. They hadn't just retaliated. They had declared war. They had spilled Russo blood. Dante's face was a mask of such cold, pure, inhuman rage that I shrank in my chair. He looked at me, and his eyes were black. "Get the capos," he ordered Marco, his voice a lethal whisper. "All of them. Here. Now." Marco was gone. "You," Dante said, his gaze pinning me to the chair. "You don't move." Within 10 minutes, the room was full. The penthouse, my gilded cage, became a war room. 6 men, all in dark suits, all with the same hard, cold faces, filed in. They were Dante's lieutenants, his capos, and every single one of them looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I was the thing that had brought this on them. I was the Costanzo whore. "Don," a grizzled older man, Vinny, said, his voice a low growl. "Marco says 3, on our own territory." "Costanzo and Bianchi," Dante said. He was standing at the head of his desk. He was no longer the man who had kissed me. He was a king. "It's the girl!" Vinny spat, gesturing at me with a thick, calloused hand. "This is what she brings. This is the Costanzo rot. This never would have happened if she wasn't here." Another one, younger, with a vicious scar on his cheek, snapped. "He's making us look weak, Don. He's displaying her, and they spit in our face." "She's a liability," Vinny said, his eyes cold on me. "She's a curse." "What is she worth, Dante? 3 of our men. Sal. Is she worth Sal's life?" I shrank. I was going to be sick. They were right. They were all right. I was the poison. I had brought this. I was a disease. I looked at Dante, my eyes swimming with a sick, hot shame. I was ready to be the sacrifice. It was the logical play. He would give me back. He would trade me for peace. It was the only thing that made sense. "The girl," Vinny pressed, "isn't worth it. End this. Give her back." The room was silent. Every man was staring at Dante, waiting for the order. Dante let the silence stretch, so tight it was a wire. He was still. A statue. He looked at Vinny. He looked at all his capos one by one, his gaze a cold, hard thing. Then his eyes found me. I was trembling, my hands fisted, waiting for my death sentence. "She is not," he said, his voice a low, soft, dangerous thing. "The girl—" He took a step, moving from behind his desk. He walked, slowly, until he was standing next to my chair. He put his hand on my shoulder. His touch was not a brand. It wasn't possessive. It was a claim, a statement. "Vinny," Dante said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "You say she isn't worth it?" His fingers tightened on my shoulder, a gesture of reassurance, a gesture of ownership. "She," he said, his voice filling the room, not with volume but with a terrifying, absolute power, "is worth everything." The room went cold. "She is worth more than Bianchi's entire pathetic bloodline," Dante continued, his gaze sweeping over his men. "She is worth more than Costanzo's entire rotten, bankrupt legacy. She is mine. She is Russo. An attack on her is an attack on me, an attack on this family." He let the words hang. "They think this makes me weak," he growled. "They think they can take what is mine. They think they can spill our blood and there will be no consequences." He looked at me, and his eyes were not the cold eyes of the dawn, or the hot, hungry eyes of the lover. They were something else. They were the eyes of a protector, a king. "They are about to learn," he said to me, his voice a dark promise, "what I am willing to burn for what I love." He turned back to his men. "Vinny, you will take Bianchi's ports, all of them. Burn them to the water. I want him on his knees by midnight. Marco, you will find every asset Costanzo has left. You will freeze it. You will seize it. You will salt the earth where his organization stood." He looked around the room, a dark god of vengeance. "This is not a war. This is an extermination. They have insulted my family, and for that there is no mercy." The men, their faces no longer full of doubt, but a cold, hard resolve, just nodded. "Yes, Don?" They filed out, a quiet, lethal army. I was left alone with him. I was shaking. My father had sold me, my fiancé had tried to kill me. This man, this monster, my captor, my enemy, he had just declared me worth a war. He had just declared me his family. He knelt in front of me, his suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. He was on one knee, his gaze level with mine. He raised his hand, and with a terrifying, uncharacteristic tenderness, his thumb brushed the tear that had finally escaped and trailed down my cheek. "You are not a liability, Sofia," he whispered, his voice a raw, dark vow. "You are my queen, and they have just sealed their own fate." I looked into the eyes of the devil, and for the first time in my life I wasn't scared. My choice was made.
Chapter 10. Dante. The sound of the office door closing, the heavy, expensive snick of the lock engaging, was a gunshot in the silence. My capos were gone. The orders were given. The war had begun. I was still on one knee, a general kneeling before his flag. And my flag was trembling. "You are my queen, and they have just sealed their own fate." The words hung in the air, an irrevocable vow. I had said it. Not in the heat of passion, not in the dark of my bedroom, but in the cold light of day, in front of my capos. I had declared her family. I had just signed Sal's death warrant and the 2 new kids, and in the same breath, I had named my why. I had exposed my own singular, catastrophic weakness, and I had never felt stronger. I watched the tear track on her face, my thumb still hovering where I had brushed the moisture from her skin. Her eyes. Dio, her eyes! The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. She was looking at me, really looking at me. Not as a monster, not as a captor, not even as a lover. She was looking at me like I was her only ally, like I was hers. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. That kiss last night. It wasn't a surrender. It was a recognition. I had been a fool. The cold, sterile performance this morning, the suit, the coffee, the cold eyes. It wasn't a power play. It was a coward's retreat. I had walked out of my bedroom last night not because I was strong, but because I was terrified. She had kissed me back. After I had taken her and carried her and thrown her on my bed like a prize, after I had confessed, she had met my desperation with her own. And in that moment, I'd had everything in my hands, just as I'd whispered. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that if I had stayed, I would have broken her. I would have taken all her fear and all her anger and all her nascent trust, and I would have consumed her. I would have branded her in a way that had nothing to do with knives or words and everything to do with our bodies, and she would have woken up this morning hating me and hating herself. So I had walked away. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was an act of control so profound it had left me hollow. And she had, of course, interpreted it as the ultimate rejection. I had seen it in her face when she walked into the office. The shame, the humiliation. I was a fool. He was like them. I could hear her thoughts, and that had been more painful than Sal's death. Now she knew. She is worth everything. I rose, slowly, to my feet. She didn't flinch. She just watched me, her hands clasped in her lap. They'll be dead by morning, I said, my voice quiet. Not a boast, a fact. Costanzo, Bianchi. Their entire organizations will be ash. Vinny and Marco are efficient. 3 men, she whispered, her voice rough. They died. Because of me. No, I said, my voice sharp, hard. I walked to the bar, my back to her. I needed the distance. I poured 2 glasses of water, my hand steady, and brought one to her. She took it. They died because of me, because I showed a moment of what they perceived as weakness at the club. They died because 2 old, stupid, desperate men thought they could take what was mine. I drained my own glass. They died because I wanted you, and I was not subtle about it. I went to my desk, but I didn't sit. I leaned against it, facing her. The king on his throne, addressing his queen. The war has started, Sofia. What you saw here, that was just the beginning. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be a slaughter. I'm not going to just win. I'm going to exterminate. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. My men, they will follow my orders. They will burn the city for me. But they accept you now only because I told them to, because I staked my name on you. But you have not chosen. She frowned. What do you mean? I'm here. You're here because you were running from them, I said, pushing off the desk. I began to pace. You're here because I kept you. You're here because you saw me as a protector. You're here because you kissed me back in a moment of desperation, of confusion. I stopped in front of her. But you have never chosen to be here. You have never chosen me. I don't understand, she whispered. I am giving you that choice. Right now. Before I go too far. Before we go too far. I felt the blood drain from my own face. This was the real test. Not the capos. Not the war. This. I can have a plane fueled and ready in an hour, I said, my voice flat, professional, as if I were closing a deal. It will take you anywhere in the world. Paris, London, a private island in the Pacific. I will deposit $10 million into a new account, under a new name. You will have a new passport, a new identity. You will be free. Her eyes widened, her lips parting. Free, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Free of your father, free of Bianchi, and free of me. This all stops. I will call off the war. I will make a deal. I will let them live on the condition that they never, ever speak your name again. You will be a ghost. Gone. You can go to school. You can get married. You can live a normal life. I was offering her the world. I was offering her the one thing I could never have. And I was praying to a God I didn't believe in that she would spit in my face. She just stared at me. She was processing. The brilliant mind I had watched for weeks, the mind that tore through ledgers, was now running this calculation. Life. Or me. Freedom. Or this. A normal man. Or the devil. The silence stretched. It was a physical, agonizing weight. My heart was a stone. I had given her the out. I had to. She deserved that. She deserved a choice. Don't take it. Don't you dare take it, Sofia. I watched a single, slow tear roll down her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of fear. It was something else. And if I stay? She asked, her voice a reedy, thin whisper. My heart stuttered. If you stay, I said, and my voice dropped, the professionalism gone, replaced by the raw, dark truth. There is no going back, for either of us. Normal is gone forever. You're not my prisoner. You're not my accountant. I knelt again. I was on both knees this time, a supplicant. I took her hands. They were cold. If you stay, you are my queen, in truth. Not just in name. You will stand next to me. You will have my power. You will have my name. You will have all of me. And I confessed, my voice breaking, will have all of you. I looked into her eyes. My soul laid bare. But if you stay, Sofia, I don't make a deal. I don't stop. I don't let them live. I brought her hands to my lips, kissing her knuckles. If you stay, I whispered, I will burn their entire world down for you. I will salt the earth where their houses stood. I will eradicate their names from this city. I will finish what they started. And I will do it for you. You will be the queen of an empire built on their ashes. I let go of her hands. I stood up. The choice is yours. A new life or a new world. My world. I gave her the power my father had stolen from her. The power I had stolen from her. She stood up. She was no longer the trembling girl from the church. She wasn't the terrified captive in the car. She wasn't the shamed woman from this morning. She was tall. She was regal. She was the woman who had said my name in the club and pulled me back from a murder. She walked to the window, looking out over the city. My city. They killed 3 men, she said, her voice a cold, clear bell. They killed Sal, They were targeting a children's hospital, Dante, to send a message. Yes, because I wasn't just a liability to them. I was an insult. My father, my own father, would rather see me dead than see me with you. Yes. She turned from the window. Her eyes were not the eyes of Sofia Costanzo. They were the eyes of a queen. They were as hard and as cold and as clear as my own. She looked at me, the devil who had offered her a choice, when her family had only ever given her a cage. Her choice was already made. She had made it yesterday, in this very room. You asked me if I wanted a new life, she said, or a new world. She walked toward me, her heels a sharp, determined click, click, click on the marble. I don't want their world. I don't want their life. I don't want normal. She stopped, inches from me. She raised her hand, not in fear, but in a mirror of my own gesture from yesterday. She laid her palm flat on my chest, right over my heart. I want this world. I want our world. She looked me dead in the eye, her gaze a steel blade. Burn it, she said. My breath left my lungs in a rush, a ragged sound of pure, unadulterated relief. A slow, dark, real smile spread across my face. It was not the predatory smirk. It was a smile of triumph, of arrival. I covered her hand with my own, pressing her palm harder against my heart. So be it, I said. I didn't kiss her. This was bigger than a kiss. This was a coronation. I raised her hand to my lips. Then we begin.
Chapter 11. Sofia. The moment the words, "burn it," left my mouth, the world tilted. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was a violent, seismic lurch, as if the penthouse, the city, and the man in front of me had all snapped into a new, terrifying focus. Dante's smile, the slow, dark smile of triumph, was not a celebration. It was a promise, a contract signed in my name with the blood of my enemies. I had just given the devil his permission. So be it, he'd said. He hadn't kissed me. He had raised my hand to his lips, a king sealing an alliance, and said, "Then we begin." The next 48 hours were a blur of cold fury and caffeinated adrenaline. I did not leave his side. He didn't ask me to. It was assumed. I was no longer the prisoner in the glass-walled office. I was the woman in the chair beside the throne. The penthouse, my opulent, silent cage, transformed into the most efficient and terrifying war room I could have ever imagined. The capos, Vinny, Marco, and the others who had looked at me with such hatred hours before, now entered, met my gaze, and nodded. Signora Russo. They hadn't been told to. It was a simple, absolute transfer of power. Dante had declared me family, and in their world, that was a bond thicker than blood. I watched him. I watched the man I thought I knew, the quiet, obsessive, dangerously calm man, disappear, replaced by the dawn. He was a conductor of a symphony of violence. He never raised his voice. He never paced. He sat at his desk, the phone to his ear, and with a few quiet words, he tore my old life apart. Vinny, the ports, all of them. Si. And Vinny. Nessun superstite. No survivors. Marco, freeze the Costanzo assets. All of them. He has a shell in the Caymans. Check the Veritas holding. Yes, that one. Liquidate it. Transfer it to the St. Jude's Fund, the one his shipment was supposed to go to. Yes, I want him to know why he's poor. My heart didn't even stutter. I was the one who had found the Veritas holding. I had been digging in his books for a week, and when I'd seen the name, I'd cross-referenced it with my father's old ledgers, the ones I'd been forced to balance since I was 16. I had handed Dante the knife and I had pointed to the exact spot to plunge it. I felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. I felt a cold, clean, righteous satisfaction. This was the man who had sold me. This was the man who had let Bianchi put his hands on me. This was the man who would have let me be whatever that pig had in store, all to cover his own pathetic failings. I watched the news on the massive, muted television in the corner. A series of catastrophic, apparently coordinated fires at the city's southern ports. Authorities are baffled. The Costanzo family, pillars of the city's import-export business, are facing total financial ruin this morning as all of their assets have been mysteriously frozen in a complex web of international. It was brutal. It was efficient. It was total. By the second night, it was over. The capos had left. The phones were silent. The television was off. The penthouse was just a penthouse again. A silent, dark tower looming over a city that had no idea it had just been conquered. It was just us. Dante stood by the windows, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking out at the lights. He had taken off his suit jacket. His tie was gone, and his sleeves were rolled up. He looked tired, but not defeated. He looked like a man who had just finished a long, hard day's work. I was on the sofa, my legs tucked under me. I hadn't slept. I wasn't sure I ever would again. "It's done," I said. It wasn't a question. "It's done," he confirmed, his voice a low rumble. "Bianchi is no longer a concern. He signed over his entire organization this afternoon in exchange for a flight to a country with no extradition. He'll be dead within a year, but it won't be by my hand." "And my father?" He turned, his face a mask of shadows. "He has nothing, less than nothing. The bank seized his house this morning. Your stepmother left him. He is a ghost. He has no money, no power, and no name. He had destroyed them. For me. He had burned the world, just as he'd promised. I should have felt something. Grief? Remorse. Something. I felt free. I stood up, my own bare feet silent on the marble, and walked to him. I stopped a few feet away. The war was over, the adrenaline was gone, and now the silence was filled with a different kind of tension. "Why?" I whispered. He looked at me, his gaze unreadable. "Why what, Mia Regina?" "I did what you asked." "No," I said, shaking my head. "Before that, all of it. The club, keeping me here, the books. Why me, Dante? Why go to all this trouble for me? I was just a girl. I was your enemy." He stared at me, a long, searching look. He was deciding. He was deciding whether to tell me the last, final truth. "You think this started 2 weeks ago, when you fell into my car," he said, his voice soft. "Didn't it?" A low, humorless chuckle vibrated in his chest. "No, Sofia. This started 6 months ago. My blood went cold." What are you talking about?" "Your father," he said, taking a step toward me. "He was a fool. A proud, stupid, greedy fool. He got in over his head. He tried to skim from one of my territories, a simple, idiotic mistake. I was displeased." He stopped inches from me. I was going to ruin him. It was just business. I was going to bleed him dry, slowly, and take his company as payment. It would have taken me a year, maybe 2. What changed?" His eyes dropped to my mouth. "I saw you," he whispered. "It was at the mayor's charity ball. 6 months ago. You were in a green dress. You were miserable. Your father was parading you around trying to sell you to one of his investors. And you were just standing there. This brilliant, burning, beautiful woman. and you were in a cage. He was treating you like cattle. I remembered that night. The green dress. The investor. I had wanted to die. I don't... I looked into your eyes, he breathed, from across the room, and I saw, everything. You were smarter than all of them. You were stronger, and you were trapped. He raised his hand, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. So I changed my plan, he said. Ruin was too impersonal. I wanted him to suffer. I wanted to take from him what he truly valued, not his company, not his money, you. My heart stopped. It didn't just stutter. It stopped. The debt, I choked out. The one he was forcing me to marry Bianchi for. Was a lie, Dante finished, his voice a soft, velvet, devastating thing. Your father owed that debt, yes, but he didn't owe it to Antonio Bianchi. He looked me dead in the eye, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. So perfect, so terrible, so right. He owed it to me. I couldn't breathe. Bianchi? I whispered. A pawn. A pathetic, lecherous fool who was easy to manipulate. I encouraged his interest in you. I fed his ego. I pulled his strings and I made him believe that he was the one squeezing your father. I made him believe that he was the one who would get the prize. The room was spinning. The escape. The car. The church. I was going to let them destroy each other, he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. I was going to let Bianchi force your father's hand. I was going to let your wedding day arrive. And then, at the last possible second, I was going to step in. I was going to remove Bianchi. I was going to expose your father's debt to me, and I was going to take everything. I was going to take his company, and I was going to take his daughter as my collateral. He had planned it. All of it. He had been stalking me. He had been saving me. But you, he said, and for the first time a look of genuine awestruck wonder crossed his face. You, my brilliant, brave, magnificent queen, you ran. He laughed, a low, stunned sound. You ran. You fought. You hiked up a 50-pound dress and you ran. I was in my car, waiting. I was a block from the church, just watching. Waiting for the right moment. And then you were there. You were running. You were coming to me. I picked your car, I stammered. It was an accident. Was it? He whispered. He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. Or was it fate? You didn't just fall into my car, Sofia. You didn't just accelerate my plan. You flew right into my hands. You chose me before you even knew my name. I looked into his eyes. The devil. My captor. My savior. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a rescue. This was an inevitability. He had seen me. He had known me when no one else had. He had seen my cage, and he had decided to burn it down and build me a throne in its place. You were always mine, Sofia, he breathed. You just didn't know it yet. I believed him. My life had not been a series of tragic accidents. It had been a long, dark, crooked path, leading straight to him. This was not a cage. This was my destiny. Then what? I whispered, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with a new, dark, profound power. Are you waiting for? I fisted my hands in his shirt. I pulled his mouth down to mine. And this time it was not a claiming. It was not a confession. It was a coronation.
Chapter 12. Dante. 6 months. 184 days since I had knelt before Sofia Costanzo and given her the world in exchange for her soul. 184 days since she had looked me in the eye, a queen accepting her crown, and told me to burn her past to the ground. I had. I stood on the terrace of my family's villa, a fortress of old stone and older money nestled in the hills overlooking the city that was now unequivocally ours. The air was cool, smelling of cypress and the distant sea. Below, the gardens were filled with my men, my capos, and their families. Not for a party, for a coronation. Our coronation. My victory had been total. Bianchi was a ghost, rumored to be drinking himself to death in some South American hellhole. Costanzo was a broken, penniless man, last seen shuffling into a city-run homeless shelter. The rot had been excised. My power was absolute. But as I looked at the empire I commanded, none of it mattered. The power was hollow. The city was just stone and glass. The victory was meaningless, because the true prize, the only one I had ever really wanted, was not yet permanent. The last 6 months had not been a war. They had been a becoming. Sofia, my Sofia, had not just adapted. She had thrived. The woman who had trembled in my car, who had flinched at my touch, was gone. In her place was a woman who walked into a room full of my most hardened capos, and with a few quiet, precise questions, dismantled their entire financial strategy and rebuilt it, doubling their profits in a quarter. She was not the Don's girl. She was not a trophy. She was Signora Russo. Vinny, who had once called her a curse, now came to her for advice on his investments. Marco, my head of security, treated her with a reverence he usually reserved only for me. She was the mind. She was the ice. She was the strategist who saw the angles I, in my focused, brutal drive, often missed. She was the devil's queen, and today, I was making it official. Today, I was binding her to me, not with a vow of war, but with one of eternity. I heard the heavy oak doors of the salon slide open behind me. I didn't turn. Not yet. I wanted to savor this. The anticipation. The final agonizing seconds of wanting before the lifetime of having. I heard her footsteps. A slow, deliberate, confident click, click, click on the stone. Your tempting fate standing so close to the edge, mio diavolo. Her voice came, a low velvet purr that still, after all this time, sent a jolt of raw possession straight to my groin. Someone might get the idea to push you. I turned, slowly, and my world, which had tilted on its axis 6 months ago, shattered and reformed all over again. She was not in white. White was the color of her sacrifice. White was the color of the lambs her father and Bianchi had tried to lead to slaughter. White was the color of her past. Today, Sofia was in red, a deep, visceral blood red, the red of a Valentine, the red of a pulsing artery, the red of the Russo family crest, the red of a queen. The dress was not a virginal monstrosity of lace and tulle. It was a weapon. It was made of silk, fitting her like a second skin, clinging to every curve I had spent the last 6 months mapping, memorizing, and claiming as my own. It was cut low, showing the sharp, elegant line of her collarbones. Her dark hair was swept up, held in place by an intricate, Gothic-looking pin of silver and rubies. She was not a bride. She was a goddess of vengeance. She was sin incarnate. She was mine. Let them, I said, my voice rough. Only you could get close enough. And you, Mia Regina, you'd just pull me back. Who says I would? She challenged, a playful, dangerous light in her eyes. She stopped, inches from me. I reached out, my hand tracing the line of her jaw. Because you'd miss me. I'd miss your bank accounts, she retorted, but her hand came up to cover mine, her skin warm against my own. They are your bank accounts, I reminded her. Then I'd definitely miss them. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. Dio, I loved this woman. It's time, I whispered. I know. Her smile faded, replaced by that same intense, steel-spined seriousness I'd seen the day she'd told me to burn her past. I offered her my arm. Sofia Costanzo, are you ready? She slid her arm through mine, her fingers lacing with my own. She looked me dead in the eye, her gaze a promise. I am not Sofia Costanzo, she said, her voice a cold, clear bell. She died 6 months ago. She leaned in, her lips brushing my ear, her hot breath a caress. I am here to claim my real name. We walked together through the doors and into the grand hall. It was not a church. It was the heart of my home. A room built by my grandfather, with dark, coffered ceilings and a fireplace large enough to stand in. There was no priest. A judge, a man whose entire career I owned, stood by the fireplace, his hands trembling slightly. My family, my real family, was there. Vinny, Marco, my capos, my soldiers, their wives. They stood, a silent, dark-suited army, and as we entered, they didn't just look at me. They looked at her. They bowed their heads, a sign of respect, a pledge of fealty. We stopped in front of the judge. He began to speak, reading some dry, legal nonsense from a card. I didn't listen. I was looking at her. She was not looking at the judge. She was looking at me. Her eyes were not the eyes of a captive. They were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a woman who knew her own power. A woman who had been forged in fire and had come out steel. And now, the vows, the judge stammered, visibly sweating. I turned, taking both of her hands in mine. This was it, the final seal. I, Dante Russo, I began, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the silent hall. Take you, Sofia. I paused, my gaze locking with hers. I take you as my wife, my partner, my queen. I have no world, no power, no life that is not yours. I vowed, and I meant every word. I was a king of an empty castle, a man of ice until you are the fire, you are the heart, you are my greatest, most profound weakness, and you are my most lethal strength. I slid a simple, impossibly large, blood-red ruby onto her finger. It was flanked by 2 black diamonds. With this ring, I said, I pledge you my name. I pledge you my vengeance. I pledge you my protection. I pledge you my entire soul. I was born the devil, but you have made me a god, and I am, and will always be, yours. A tear, one single, perfect tear, escaped her eye. She did not look away. She took a shaky breath. I, Sofia, she began, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word, take you, Dante Russo, as my husband, my partner, my king. She looked not just at me, but at the men watching, a queen addressing her court. I came to you with nothing but a name I despised, she said, her voice ringing with a new, dark power. You gave me a new one. You gave me a choice. You gave me a sword, and you taught me how to use it. She gripped my hands, her small, strong fingers lacing with mine. "I will not promise to obey," she said, and a low chuckle rumbled through the room. "But I promise to reign. I promise to be the ice to your fire. I promise to be the mind to your fury. I will stand by your side. I will guard your back. I will be the keeper of your secrets and the enforcer of your will." She slid a simple, heavy band of black platinum onto my finger. It was cold, a beautiful, perfect shackle. "With this ring," she whispered, for only me to hear, "I pledge you my loyalty. I pledge you my mind. I pledge you my darkness. You are the devil who saved me, and I am the queen who will never let you go." The judge, pale and shaking, looked between us. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you, Don and Signora Russo. You may kiss your bride. I didn't wait. I pulled her to me. This kiss was not the desperate, angry claiming of my office. It was not the coronation of that night. This was forever. It was a kiss of equals, a kiss of fire and ice, a kiss of two dark souls finally finding their match. It was a kiss that sealed 1,000 broken pieces and forged them into an unbreakable, lethal, beautiful whole. She kissed me back with the same desperate, possessive hunger she had shown that first night. But now there was no fear. There was only home. I broke the kiss, resting my forehead against hers. The room was silent. "My queen," I breathed. "My king," she replied. We turned to the room, to our family. Vinny was the first to move. He stepped forward, his grizzled face split by a rare, wide smile. "Signora Russo," he said, bowing his head. "Benvenuta. Welcome." The room erupted. Later, long after the judge had fled, long after the food had been eaten and the toasts of "To the Queen" had been made, I found her. She was on the same terrace, wrapped in my suit jacket, looking out at the city lights. Our city. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, pulling her back against my chest. She sighed, her head leaning back to rest on my shoulder. "Happy Mia Regina," I murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Happy," she confirmed, "and powerful, as you should be." We stood in silence, just breathing each other in. "It's funny," she whispered, her hand finding mine and lacing our fingers together over her stomach. "That first day, in the church, I was so terrified. I was a sacrifice in a white dress, running for my life." "I remember," I said, my voice thick. "I jumped into a stranger's car to escape a wedding, to escape a monster." "And you found the monster," I said, my voice dark. She turned in my arms, her body pressing flush against mine. Her eyes, those intelligent, fiery, beautiful eyes, were full of a love so fierce it still staggered me. "No," she said, her hands coming up to cup my face. "I didn't find a monster. I found mine." She looked at me, the woman I had seen in a green dress, the girl who had fallen into my car, the queen who now wore my ring. "That day," I whispered, my thumb tracing her swollen lower lip, "I told you, wrong groom. You're mine now." "I remember," she breathed. "I was wrong," I confessed. "It was never the wrong groom. There was never any other groom." I leaned in, my lips brushing hers. "There was only ever me." "I know," she whispered, and she pulled me down, her mouth claiming mine. I was always yours, Dante. I just had to burn the world to find you.